Hey everyone. So I'm in the process right now of working on some landscape photography video tutorials, and because I needed to test out my new mic and the screen recording software, I figured I would put together just a quick video going over some different techniques I use for noise reduction on wildlife images. Now, shooting at higher shutter speeds when you're capturing things like birds in flight means that you're going to end up a lot of times using a higher ISO just so you get that shutter speed. This photo was from a few summers ago, just after sunrise, of this osprey landing on a little post right here. And to capture the movement as it was landing, I used a shutter speed of 1/2000th of a second at ISO 1100. At the time, I was using a Nikon D7200 for wildlife, and it's a great camera, but it doesn't do super well with these higher ISOs. And I ended up with a little bit of noise here in the blue sky and in the bird. However, solid colors like blue sky, the noise tends to be much more apparent than something like a bird where the feather detail will hide some of that noise. So I'm just going to show you a quick technique to mask out and get rid of all of the noise in the blue sky where it's much more apparent. So I'm just going to do a couple quick adjustments to this image. Push the exposure a tiny bit, boost the shadows a tiny bit to get some more detail on this wing. And I'm actually going to tone down the saturation of the blue just a little bit because it looked a little bit oversaturated. And those are all the adjustments I'm going to make to the raw file. Now, Lightroom does have its own noise reduction, but it is applied globally and I find it doesn't work particularly well. If I zoom in here again, now I can crank up the noise reduction in Lightroom and it'll definitely get rid of all this noise in the blue sky, but it's also going to remove a lot of this nice detail on the bird here. And for that reason, I tend to never really use Lightroom's noise reduction. So what I'm going to do is right click on this image and click Edit in Adobe Photoshop CC. So now we've carried this image over and opened it up in Photoshop. Basically what we're going to be doing is duplicating the image, applying some noise reduction, and then having it so that the noise reduction is only applied to the blue sky. So the first thing that we want to do is go over to your layer here and right click Duplicate Layer. Just hit OK. This is going to be making a copy of that layer. Making sure that the background copy is selected, we're going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Now, you might recognize this. This layout is basically the same thing as in Lightroom, but it's just the Camera Raw filter. To get to the noise reduction, you want to go to these two triangles up here in the top right. That is your detail panel. And I like to zoom in to 100% and move your luminance slider up until you see all of the noise in your sky is removed. 50% did a pretty nice job. Now your luminance detail, this is Photoshop's way of trying to retain some of the detail that normally would be lost by applying too much noise reduction. Because there's no detail in the sky that we want to keep, you can either leave this as is or you can drop it down. Basically all that's going to be doing is making the sky a little bit smoother. Hit OK. Now if I zoom in to 100% here and turn this layer on and off just by clicking this little eye icon, you can see it's done a really good job of removing all that noise in the sky, but also basically obliterating all the detail and the feathers, which is what we want to keep. So what we're going to do is apply a mask. Basically what a mask does, it allows you to brush in whatever effect you're using, whatever adjustments you've made. Just for a really quick example, if I wanted to make some crazy adjustment here, this little thing right here, this is your layer mask. If I take a brush and paint over it, you can see that where I brush is going to remove that effect. Anything that's white is going to show the effect. Now obviously this adjustment is way too far for anything useful, but just to show you what it does. So we want to add a layer mask to the noise reduction layer. You do that by clicking this little icon right here, and you want to invert this mask because, like I said, white is showing any adjustment that's been made. So what you can do is press Control or Command if you're on a Mac and I, and that will invert the layer. And click on the actual layer and go to Select, Color Range. Now, by default, when you open up Color Range, it's going to give you this little eyedropper tool. You want to go over to your actual image and click on an area of blue sky. And you can see this is basically a preview of the mask that's going to be generated. You can see that all of the blue sky has been selected, even like these little tiny spots in between the feathers, but none of the bird has been selected. And I click OK. Now you can see people call these little marching ants. That's where your selection is. You can see that all the sky is selected, but none of the bird. You want to go back and click on the layer mask. Make sure you're not clicked on the layer still. And go to your brush and make sure white is selected. And your opacity is at 100%. Now all you have to do is just brush over any spots where there's blue sky. Just do a quick check here, make sure I've hit all the spots needed. And go to Select, Deselect. If I zoom back in to 100% here, you can see, if I turn this on and off, that it's removed all the noise in the sky, but none in the bird. Now you can see at 100%, there's still noise visible in the feathers, but it's not as apparent. Like I said, when you have these patterns and texture, it tends to hide that noise fairly well. And I zoom back out here, you really can't see it, but the blue sky where the noise was much more apparent. This is just one quick technique. A lot of times you get a bird in flight where you need that high ISO and shutter speed, and you have a very noisy sky behind it. So this is just a quick technique to get rid of that. Once you get it down, it takes like 2 minutes. So let's move on to the next image. Now that last technique will work really well when you have something like a solid blue sky behind your subject in one consistent color to apply that noise reduction to. But for an image like this, where you have sort of a busier background and there's not just one color that you want to remove the noise from, that technique won't really work. This is a photo from, I believe, the fall of 2014. This barred owl was hanging out at the S-Curves at Plum Island pretty much every afternoon for a few weeks, and a lot of times would come in and perch close to the road, so there was a lot of happy photographers at that time. I was using the Canon 6D for this shot, and because it's a full frame camera, it performs a little bit better at these higher ISOs. This was only at ISO 800, so not too bad. If I zoom into 100%, you can see there's some fine noise in this background. It's not too bad, but I'd like to remove it, and it's a fairly sharp photo. There's a lot of really nice feather detail here, so I want to do what I can to remove any noise from the background, but maintain all this detail here in the feathers. Now I've already done a couple quick adjustments to this raw file. I'm not really going to go over these. We're going to immediately bring it into Photoshop. So just like before, we're going to right click on the photo and click Edit in Photoshop CC. Now this process is very similar to the last one. A lot of the same steps are going to be taken. The first thing we're going to do is right click on the background and create a duplicate layer. And making sure the background copy is selected, click Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Now, I always like to zoom into 100% when doing the noise reduction. That way I am making sure I'm catching all the noise that I want to remove and not going too far. So just like before, we're going to click on these two triangles here. That's your detail panel. Because this was at a little bit of a lower ISO and there wasn't as much noise, I'm not going to go to 50 with the luminance slider. I'm probably going to go up to about 25. And that did a great job of smoothing out all that fine noise. But of course, it's going to remove some of the detail in these feathers. We're going to click OK. Just like before, we're going to apply a layer mask to this copy by clicking this little icon down here. However, instead of going to the color select tool, we're going to use a tool called Apply Image. Now basically what Apply Image does is goes in and analyzes all the light values in your image and then creates a mask for you based on those light values. Noise tends to live in the darker parts of your image. The brighter parts, like these brighter sections of the feathers here in the owl, noise usually is not very apparent in those areas. So making sure that the layer mask is selected, we're going to go to Image, Apply Image. There's a few different drop-down menus here. You want to leave all of this the same and make sure that your blending mode is set to normal. Automatically, what Apply Image does is creates a mask based on your brights, which is not what we want. We want a layer mask based on our darks. So we're going to make sure this little box invert is selected. Just hit OK. Now if I alt-click on the mask, it'll show me what's being selected. Anything that's white or lighter shades of gray are being selected and the noise reduction is being applied to. Anything that's black, no noise reduction is being applied to it. Now it's a little confusing, this is kind of backwards looking, but once you get the hang of it, it'll make a lot more sense. I click back on the layer here. Now once I apply the Apply Image, I like to zoom into 100% and just make sure that the mask is where I want it to be. If I turn this layer on and off, I can see where the noise is being applied to. Now, if you want to take this one step further, you can. This is where it starts to get a little bit more advanced, but bear with me. If you want to adjust that mask and change where the noise reduction is being applied to, you can alt-click on the mask and press Control or Command if you're on a Mac, M. This is a curve adjustment. Now, if I want more noise reduction being applied to these areas, I can take this little hand tool, click on it, and click and drag any area where I want more noise reduction being applied to. By dragging it up, it gets more white, which means more noise reduction is being applied. Alternatively, if I want less noise reduction being applied to an area, I can click and hold and drag down. You can see this is creating more of a separation between the areas of white where the noise reduction is being applied and black where the noise reduction is not being applied. I know it's a little bit confusing, but like I said, play around with this a few times, it'll start to make more sense and you'll see that it's a very powerful way of selectively applying that noise reduction. Once you're happy with this, you can click OK and click back on the image to bring it back to this normal view. And again, I'll zoom into 100%, and you can see by turning this on and off, it's removing all of the noise from the shadows, but keeping pretty much all of the detail in the feathers, which is perfect. Again, it seems like it's a confusing process. Once you get the hang of this, it'll take about a minute per photo, and you can really control where that noise reduction is being applied to. I've tried Photoshop's noise reduction, Lightroom's noise reduction, Nik Define, Topaz. I've tried many different plugins and different ways of removing noise. This is what I find to work the best and the most controlled to get the better looking image in the end. Give these a try, let me know how they work for you, and thanks.